We have a lot of strange faces here. I know most of you, but there's still some strange faces here. But there are some people that I don't know, and maybe you don't know me. Might be a blessing. That's one way to look at it. But I'm Bill Brinkley. I've been around for a little while. My family moved to Rome in 1953 when the GE plant opened. And so we've been here for a little while with the church, and my family helped start the church up at North Rome, which is no longer in existence. So that was in 1957. A lot of the citizens, one of our preachers was Joe Sisson. And there's still George, I think is still around. I don't know if he's alive or not, but anyway, one of the preachers we had was K.D. Holcomb. I know King David Holcomb, that was his name. And he went by K.D. Holcomb, but King David Holcomb was his name. But we're glad to be here, and we're going to talk about what I believe is very, very important. And I believe it's an area where we're lacking in the church. I think all of us are well aware of our relationship with the Lord and with God, and we know all about that, and probably we're in a very good relationship, but what we're leaving out is our relationship with one another. And I just don't see it myself how we have fulfilled these things that we're going to be talking about. And there's just so much I can't hardly find a way to start. But the idea came from this book right here, written by Gene Getz. He's written some other good books too. But what he does, he has looked at several passages in the New Testament, and he calls them one another passages. And the reason he calls them one another passages is because they have the word one another in them. It's one word in the original language, and it's going to be hard for me to say because all of my adult life I have mispronounced that Greek word. But I found out what I believe is the right way to say it, and I'm going to try to say it right now. And it's the word alleilon. Alleilon. Nothing special about it. It's not a magical word. It's not a mystical word. It's simply translated one another. However, what it does in its usage, it brings together a lot of responsibilities that we have to one another. And so it's special in that way. Let me just read a little bit of his introduction. I don't like to do this, but because I never liked it when my teachers did it, but I think, they're either going to have to read it or pretend that I said it. So, no one reading the New Testament objectively can deny that God has a unique plan for every Christian during his life on earth. True, God has an eternal plan, but that plan begins in space and time. God desires that every believer be a functioning member of a local church. Anybody ever heard of the 80-20 rule? What is basically the 80-20 rule? And it applies in every group situation there is, business, church, everything. 20% yeah. 20% does 80% of the work, another 80% do 20% of the work. Something like that. And I believe that's the case in the church. We've got a small amount of functioning members, and we're not talking about doing the preaching or teaching necessarily or cleaning the building or any of that. We're talking about all these responsibilities that we'll get into as we go through this study. And we'll touch on it some this evening. These believers mutually care for one another, minister to one another, and consequently build one another up. And that's where the building up one another comes from. Taught throughout the New Testament. Paul states this plan most clearly in his Ephesian letter. Christians are to speak the truth in love, and as we do, we will in all things grow up into him who is the head, that is Christ. From him, the whole body, joined and held together by every supporting ligament, grows and builds itself up in love as each part does its work. Every part. And what we're going to study to begin with primarily is the body concept. All of us have a physical body. We may not like the body we have, but we got one, and we're familiar enough with it, we know how it works. If you hurt yourself in some way, that handicaps you, even if it's just a temporary, maybe you break a bone. Well, you're going to get better someday, but then it's going to hinder you. And so if you have a body that's only functioning at about 20%, how well are you going to be able to do anything? Not well. And so we want to show how important it is for everyone to be involved, everyone to be functioning and functioning properly. And that's what we'll learn as we go throughout this particular study. That word allelon is used 58 times in the New Testament outside of the Gospels. Paul uses it 40 times. And so a lot of the times, if I say, well, let's go see how many of these things we can find, some of them will be duplicated, some will be in parallel passages and things like that. But I think that's an indicator. The fact that Paul used it 40 times is an indicator of just how important this was to him. And the Holy Spirit, of course, who inspired him to say that. Now, this is supposed to be a class discussion thing. So I told everybody that I dealt with, I'm not going to stand up here and lecture, so don't let me do that. Don't let me do that. And anybody ever studied this before? Has anybody ever studied the one another passages? Can you think of any? There's one everybody ought to think of, but love one another. Okay, great. You get an A for tonight, because that's where we're going to start, because all these different things that we're going to be talking about, and I've got a list of them, and I don't even know if we'll get there tonight, they spring out of our love for one another. If we love one another, then we'll be motivated to do these things, because these things will help us. And who else will it help? The other person. The other person. And some of these things may not have ever happened to you. Some of these things may not have ever happened to you that we're going to be talking about. There's about 15 of them. He has 12 in his book. I found a couple more. Maybe he didn't think they were important, and that's okay. And you might find one that I haven't found. But we'll go ahead before we forget. On one of your outlines, on the back side of it, there's a place for you to, between now and next week, find all the one another passages you can in the New Testament. Now, how would you do that? Well, okay, you can Google, AI. You could read through the New Testament between now and next week, and every time you come across one of them, write it down. Or you could take me out to dinner one evening, and I'll tell you what they are. So there's ways to do it. But this is going to do a couple of things. It's going to get you in the book. It's going to get you in the book. And it's going to give you, something to do, to contribute toward the class. So what we're going to start with, if nobody has any questions or anything, there's actually a lot more people here tonight than I thought would be here from what folks were saying. I mean, I had Treva run all 500 copies of our outline, and I know that there are thousands out there in the streaming this, and hopefully our friends over in Alabama are streaming it over there. I don't know how that works. They're an hour behind us. Does that mean they got it an hour ago before I started, or what? Okay. Luke chapter 8. Jesus tells a parable. And I've always called it the parable of the sower, but what is it really, the parable of? What's the parable about? What's the main thing in this particular parable, if you know which one we're talking about? Behold, a sower went forth to sow. Now, I think, David, did you get that one?
Yes.
Would you read that for us, please?
Sure.
He's going to read the parable, and then somebody else, I think, is going to read how Jesus interprets it.
All right, this is Jesus speaking. He says, a farmer went out to sow his seed, and he was scattering the seed. Some fell along the path, it was trampled on, and the birds ate it up. Some fell on rocky ground, and when it came up, the plant withered because they had no moisture. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up with it and choked the plants. Still, other seed fell on good soil. It came up and yielded a crop 100 times more than was sown. When he said this, he called out, whoever has ears to hear, let them hear.
Okay, what did, just as an aside, what did Jesus mean when they say something like that, whoever has ears to hear, let him hear? I mean, doesn't everybody have ears? What is he saying in essence? Yeah, you need to listen to this. This is something you need to listen to. Doesn't mean if you don't have ears, you don't have to listen. It means this is something you need to listen to. And so, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. Now, what is the essence of what's going on here? What is Jesus saying?
This is talking about the Word and how the Word is received and the type of heart that it's received in.
Okay, he's talking about the condition of the heart. When someone hears the gospel, the condition of their heart is the determining factor of where that gospel goes. Okay? And so he gives 4 different situations there. And somebody speculated that Jesus may have been there with his disciples, and there happened to be a sower over there walking along sowing the seed. And that's what prompted Jesus to teach this lesson, because he did that. He used object lessons. He used visual aids to communicate truths. And so he said the sower went forth to sow. So the sower is not the deal. We know that the seed is the word. What the issue is here, the condition of the heart. So we need to understand that. And he says some of it fell along the path, the rocky soil, among the thorns, and good ground. Now, somebody else I asked to read the next verses. Who was that? Who? Did I ask you to read verses or? Gene. Okay, Gene. Thanks. Yes, sir. I'm sorry. Thank you, sir. Good job. Good job. So Jesus tells us the parable, then he explains the parable. And so on our outline there, you see potential paths for pardoned people. They can die. I mean, these are people who are saved. Except in the first case where the seed never took root. You can be saved, return to the world. You can stagnate and become sterile, or you can grow and mature and reproduce. Now, which of those should be the normal one or the expected one? Obviously, obviously, grow and mature. So what we're talking about is when a person is converted is to help them grow and mature. And that's a whole different subject right there. And so growth and reproduction is a normal expected path of maturity. Did I have someone read 1 Corinthians 3? Was somebody? Okay, Darrell. Thank you, sir. Please.
Okay, 1 Corinthians 3, 1 through 3. And I, brothers and sisters, do not speak to you as spiritual people, but only as fleshly, as to infants in Christ. I gave you milk to drink, not solid food, for you are not yet able to consume it. But even now you are not yet able, for you are still fleshly. For since there is jealousy and strife among you, are you not fleshly, and are you not walking like ordinary people?
Okay, thank you, sir. What are some signs of immaturity that Paul points out in those verses? Okay, lack of knowledge.
They're still at the starting line as to their behavior. They are doing things like the rest of the world instead of.
Okay. Okay. Jealousy, several things in there. I gave you milk to drink, not solid food. What did the Hebrew writer say to the Hebrews? You know, it said you need to go back and drink milk, because you're not able to eat the meat, And so that passage is there. I didn't want to spend too much time on this. We're just setting the stage, laying the foundation. But of course, the church at Corinth was probably the most unspiritual-minded church that we have in the New Testament. I mean, they were bad, but I don't look down on them, because you understand these people came out of a completely pagan world. No concept of one God or the true God and all that. And so it was, Paul struggled with them. And they had lots of problems. But what did Paul say? How did Paul call them? Even with all these problems, who did Paul say they were? And saints. How many of you think of yourselves as a saint? Huh? Well, as you look around here, how many of these people you think of as saints? Well, we're all saints. If you're a child of God, you're a saint. I told somebody the other day, the Catholics, I said, you got to die to be a saint in the Catholic Church, but I said, I'm a saint already.
Paul did not call them Christians. He called them saints, brethren. And saints was used more than any other term that he used.
Yeah, and he may have had a different concept in mind as far as we think of someone as a saint, as someone who, never does anything wrong. He said, I think he was thinking more along the lines of, they had been sanctified by Jesus Christ and made holy because of his holiness, not necessarily because of their own. So they weren't able to consume food for mature people. And not only had this been going on for a while, he said, even now you're not able. So, and the Hebrew writer says, when by reason of time you ought to be teachers, you have need again that somebody teach you. How long do you have to be a Christian before you can be a teacher? 40, 50, 60 years?
They had to be teaching immediately after they were baptized.
Right. They're fleshly. There's jealousy and strife, which are indicators of issues. Are you not fleshly and are not walking like mere men? So, there are some clear signs of immaturity. And what we want to do is encourage one another so that we can grow and mature. And these challenges that we have, these one another passages, are going to help us do that. Just for example, have you ever had anybody, maybe that you did something wrong and somebody come up and confront you about it? I have. One of the elders here. I put something on Facebook one time, and I didn't say it. It was just a quote, but there was a bad word in that quote. And he saw it, and buddy, he let me know right away. I need to get that down. I just didn't think it through. How many times has that happened to you? Somebody's come up to you and said, I believe you're wrong there. I love you, but, I don't think that's right. That's one of them. That's one of them that we're going to be talking about, And so, okay, any questions about what are some signs of maturity then as we think about the immaturity? What are some signs of maturity that we can look for in a person? Strong in faith. Okay, strong in faith. And they can understand God's word, because they're motivated and strive to be righteous. Strive to be holy, without which no one will see the Lord. Holiness is absolutely essential. Okay, so as we think about that, we're going to move along there on our outline. God, however, has designed a plan whereby each person who becomes a Christian can grow and develop into a full-grown spiritual man, and this is accomplished through the church. Folks, church is not just a place we go to. Church, it's organized, but it's not an organization. It's an organism. It's a living organism. And we are all part of that organism. And God didn't just, after we're baptized, just turn his back on us, and we shouldn't turn our back on anybody either. Sometimes we do that, I've always thought it was a good idea to have a class for people. Some places I've been, when you were baptized, you started in a year-long class going through the Bible. Wherever they were, wherever they were when you were baptized, that's where you started, and you stayed there for a year till you come back to that place again, And in that particular situation I'm thinking of, it's called moving towards maturity, And so there are lots of things we need to do to help as a church, but we can also help each other individually. The word church is somewhat abstract, but to help us understand God's plan for maturing people, Paul introduces us to the body concept.
We fall into that phrase, I'm going to church, the church building. Church is people.
Yes.
Building is where the congregation meets.
Now we know that. I think if you ask everybody in here if they know that, yes. But in our minds, what do we still say? Huh?
Other people that profess to be Christians.
Yeah, but I'm saying even us, what are we going to do? On Sunday morning, where are we going? When are we going? Where are we going to church? Or when are we going to church? What do we say? We have a denominational concept. And again, if we ask probably everybody in here, is the church the building or the people? They would say it's the people. But still, and maybe that's an accommodative way of saying it. But I think it ends up leading us down the wrong path. It confuses people, and a lot of denominations think that the building is the church. The building is the church. This building is just brick and mortar. The church is the people. Yeah. I like the word assembly and assembly because Paul used that word in 1 Corinthians chapter 12 and other places when you assemble together. So I like to call it the assembly, and we're going to the assembly, we're going to assemble together. I just think even though we all use it in an accommodative sense, I still think it gives us, in some way, a wrong concept. And so words have meanings. Words have meanings. Now, the body concept, what do you think that means? And I'm sure all of you have an idea to some degree. What is the body concept? Okay. What it is comparing the church to a physical human body. It's comparing the church to a physical human body. And we can all understand that. And, you know, Paul was remarkable at this. Of course, Jesus was too. He was the master teacher, and the Holy Spirit is behind all of this. But using something like a body that we are so familiar with is just an excellent way. And so let's look then. Let's look first at Romans chapter 12 and verse 4 and 5. And this is probably the briefest description we have of the body concept. In this passage, Paul says, "For just as we have many members in one body." Now, what are the members there, and what's the one body? And what's the clue that tells you what he's talking about? For just as who? We have many members. What's the members there? Your hands, your arms, your legs, your feet, your ears, your mouth, your eyes, your nose. These are all the members of your body. When you use that word members, that's what we call the parts of our body as members. You know. So he says, we as individual people have many members in one body. And that one body is our physical human body. Do you not have many different members in your physical human body? And all the members do not have the same function. Everybody got that? What does that mean in practical terms? Okay. And we'll get over to in 1 Corinthians, and I've got a question about when we get over there. It's going to be in much more detail. Why would there be a whole lot more discussion and detail among the Corinthians than some of these other groups? Because they needed it more. You know, some people you have to explain something to them a little more thoroughly than others. And the Corinthians, they were such a group. So, we who are many are one body in Christ. We who are many. Who are the we? Well, it's the Christians, the many, in a local church, and individually members one of another. Now, he's taken outside of the human body, our own human body, and applying it to a local church. You know, we have our own body, but here's the application. A local church is a body. Every local church is a body. We who are many, that's all the members of the congregation, are one body. And that's where we start breaking it down, and individually members one of another. Members one of another. That can only mean one thing, is that we're inseparably tied to each other. We are inseparably tied to each other. Can you take your arm off and lay it aside or anything? You can't take any part of your body away. We're all connected in such a way that we are members one of another. In other words, we are tied together so much so that there's no way to get around that particular fact. Okay, let's go over now to 1 Corinthians 12. I love this passage because he really gets into some details here. We're going to start in verse 12, and he's saying exactly the same thing here that he said in Romans and that we just read. But where there were two verses there, we got a bunch of verses here. For even as the body is one, and what body is he talking about there? our own physical body, for just as our own physical body is one and yet has many members, and all the members of the body, though they are many, are one body. Now, that's the truth. Here's the application. So also is Christ. The way our body is the way Christ is. For by one Spirit were we all baptized into one body, whether Jews or Greeks, whether slaves or free, and we were all made to drink of one Spirit. There are only two places in the New Testament that we're told how to get into Christ. Do you know that? Two places in the New Testament that we are told how to get into Christ. Galatians 3:26 and 27, and this verse right here. For you are all baptized in one Spirit into Christ. That's the only way you can get into Christ, is to be baptized into Christ. You can't believe yourself into Christ. You can't hope yourself into Christ. You can't wish yourself into Christ. You can't buy yourself into Christ. You can't get into Christ by osmosis, by sitting somebody that's beside somebody that's a Christmas. You got to be baptized into Christ. Galatians 3:26 and 27. For you're all children of God through faith. For as many of you as were what? Baptized into Christ have put on Christ. Only two verses in the Bible that tells us how to get into Christ specifically. Galatians 3:26 and 27, and this passage right here. That's extra. That's just preaching. Verse 14. For the body is not one member, but many. Now here's the example, the picture that he's going to paint. And he's talking about our physical body now, but he's going to be making an application. If the foot should say, because I am not a hand, I am not a part of the body, it is not for this reason any less the part of the body. Now, let's read another verse or two. And if the ear should say, because I am not an eye, I am not part of the body, it is not for this reason any the less a part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would the hearing be? If the whole were hearing, where would the sense of smell be? So, what do we learn just from those verses to start with? Everybody has a different role. Everybody has a different part to play. Now, here's my question. He talks about feet, hands, eyes, mouth. Have you ever thought about if any of those things might correlate to something similar? For example, would being a mouth be a preacher? Would being an ear refer to somebody who was a sympathetic listener? Would being an eye refer to somebody who was real good at noticing things about other people, maybe noticing when they didn't look as chipper as they normally do? Somebody that has that gift, you know, that can maybe talk to somebody or just notice that somebody's down? I don't think so, but I always like to think. Yeah, I know, but it's just, you know, and you got the feet, you know. What would the feet be? Maybe a missionary? You know, I mean, that just always intrigued me, and I don't think that's the case, but, you know, I don't know. But verse 18, now here's the kicker. Whatever you are, whether you're a foot or a hand, and maybe that's not referring to any specific place in the church. Maybe it's just referring to the fact that there are different positions in the church. But whatever you are, verse 18 is what's crucial. But now God has placed the members, each one of them in the body, just as He desired. So whatever you are, who put you there? God. Whatever you are, God made you there. He either gave you the ability to do it, or He gave you the inclination to do it, or whatever it is, God placed you in the body in a specific way. Does that make sense? Is that what the verse says? Am I misinterpreting that? And if they were all one member, where would the body be? What was one of the problems the Corinthians had as far as the gifts? What was one problem they had with the gifts, with the use of the spiritual gifts, the miraculous gifts? There was one of them that they thought was better than everything else, and that's what everybody wanted. What was it? Speaking in tongues. Boy, that was the gift to have. Oh, man, that was the best one. And that's really what Paul is dealing with here, the fact that all of them wanted to do that, you know. And so, but it doesn't make any difference what your gift is or where God put you. You're just as important to the functioning of the body as anybody else. Now, there may be some who are more visible. Michael, or elders, song leaders, they're more visible, but that doesn't mean they're necessarily more important to the church. And the eye cannot say to the hand, I have no need of you. Or again, the head to the feet, I have no need of you. Now, what's he dealing with here? Earlier, he's dealt with an inferiority complex. What's he dealing with here? The superiority complex. Some people thinking they're better than somebody else because they think they have a better place. On the contrary, it is much truer that the members of the body which seem weaker to be weaker, or which seem to be weaker, are necessary. Now he's going back to our physical body. And these members of the body, which we deem less honorable, on these we bestow more abundant honor, and our unseemly members come to have more abundant seemliness, whereas our seemly members have no need of it. But God has so composed the body, giving more abundant honor to that member which lacked. Now, what do you think he might be talking about? Which part, as he makes his point here, which part of the body do you think he's talking about that's unseemly? And we may just be guessing here. I don't know. I have an idea. Does anybody else? I think he's talking about the feet. I think he's talking about the feet. Okay, well, he could be talking about some part of the body that, you know, that we don't want to get into, you know. But I think it's feet. Now let's see how this plays out. Those members of the body which we deem less honorable. What is an expression that's used in the Bible to talk about, you know, the footstool of his feet? What is the footstool of his feet? Is that a good position or a bad position? That's bad. You know, when somebody's got their foot on top of you, that's bad. Okay. I think he's talking about the feet because if your feet hurt, you hurt all over. Of course, that's true with any part of the body. But I'm just thinking, what did they do? They wore sandals and things like that in those days, and they paid a lot of attention to their feet. You know, they washed their feet and had to take care of it if they hurt themselves. And it could be anything else. And it may not be any particular thing. It may just be the fact that there happens to be somebody in the body that we don't think of as being very important, and you know, we neglect them. He said, no, we shouldn't do that. We shouldn't do that. Even if we don't think they're important, we need to do that, because whatever part he's talking about in the physical body, even if it's not an important part, or if it's an unseemly part or whatever, sometimes it requires more attention. And so, however you want to understand that, that's fine. The point is obvious, though, and that is people that we think are not important are important. And they need to be given special care. So, and the purpose of all this is the attitude of not having the inferiority complex, not having the superiority complex, verse 25, that there should be no division in the body, but that the members should have the same care for one another. And so we treat each other equally. Now, this is just normal reaction. If Michael got sick, you're going to get picked on because you're the preacher.
And I'm sitting close.
Yeah, and you're sitting close. You're on the spit row. You know what the spit row is, don't you? The spit row is always the first row down below the preacher. Takes a brave man to sit on the spit row, but yeah. If Michael was to get sick and it said that they needed food at his house, what do you think would happen? How much food do you think he would get? I think there'd be so much food there that they wouldn't even be able to eat it all. Okay. There was a lady, I was in the barber shop the other day, and a lady come in, I guess somebody in their congregation had been sick. And she told the barber there, he has a church, and she said, do they need anything? This particular family, do they need anything? You know, I could take a cake or something over there, and I'm just sitting over there waiting for my turn. I said, ma'am, I said, my wife's been sick, and she sure could use a homemade German chocolate cake. So I tried my best to get a homemade German chocolate cake out of that deal, but it didn't work. But that the members should have the same care for one another. And then somebody needs some food, maybe that kind of sits in the back and don't know a lot of people and don't talk to a lot of people and not really connected with a lot of people, and they need something. Well, they'll probably get something, and hopefully they'll get all they need. But I'm just saying, sometimes we react to who the person is. But that's not what the Bible says. That there should be no division in the body, but that the members should have the same care for one another. That's what we want to work toward. That's what we want to work toward. Have the same care for one another. Doesn't make any difference who you are, how high you are on the social ladder, what your income is, what your job is, or anything. In God's eyes, every person is a soul. And they're important to Him. And that soul is just as important to Him as anybody else's soul. And that's kind of the way we need to look at it, Verse 26, if one member suffers, all the members suffer with it. If one member is honored, all the members rejoice with it. I remember one of my teachers, Jim McGuigan, who happens to still be alive, but he illustrated that in a long, drawn-out way, and he said, say you're hammering along, and you hit the wrong nail with your hammer. Anybody ever done that? Man, I tell you what, when I was building my house, my hands were pretty much bandaged up all the time. What do you do? So say you come down on your finger there and just smashed it good with a big old hammer. Something happened to that finger. It's bleeding. Look at it. That's not my problem. Don't get blood all over me. Go somewhere else and bleed. What do? You grab that thing. You grab that thing. And take care of it and caress it and comfort it. That's the natural reaction in our physical body that God wants us to have in the spiritual body. When somebody's hurt. Ron's, he's back there. Remember when I'm having a brain freeze. When the little boy, I can't think of the name, the little boy got in the pond, and what's that? Huh? Yeah, Nicholas Holbert. Yeah. When I found out about it, it was dark already. I come up and got Ron at his house. We drove about 100 miles an hour up to Calhoun. I'm not kidding. And we got up there, there's already a bunch of people there. I didn't realize it had been so long. I just heard of it. As soon as I heard of it, I jumped in the car, said, Ron, I'll be over there and we'll go up there. And we did. But that's what you do. You react, sometimes without thinking about it. It's just a natural reaction. And if you have to think about it, then something, I didn't say, well, I wonder if I should go up there. I wonder. No. We win. We win. Let's see. Now, in case they hadn't got the lesson, in case they had not gotten the point, verse 27, now you are Christ's body. Here, in case they missed it. Now you are Christ's body, and individually, that is, each individual Christian is a member of that body. And God has appointed in the church first apostles, second prophets, third teachers, and I don't think that's any kind of priority. I think he's just enumerating them. First apostles, second prophets, third teachers, then miracles and gifts of healing, helps, administrations, various kinds of tongues. And some of these, I think there's kind of a mixture of spiritual gifts there, the miraculous, and also natural gifts that people have, but I think today it applies to natural abilities and talents that God has given us. And so he asks some rhetorical questions in verse 29 to make the point. All are not apostles, are they? All are not prophets, are they? What if we come to church and had 200 song leaders? Or what if we come to church and had, well, here's something worse. What if we come to church and there's 200 preachers? Or we had 200 of this and that's all we had. It won't work. So he asked them these rhetorical questions. He said, it won't work that way. All do not have the gifts of healings, do they? All do not speak with tongues, do they? All do not interpret, do they? But earnestly desire the greater gifts. And I show you a still more excellent way. And there's no chapter division there. And guess what the next verse is? If I speak with the tongues of men and of angels and have not love, I have become a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. See, that's what preceded 1 Corinthians chapter 13. There should be no break there. Sometimes chapter divisions and verse divisions help us, and sometimes they hurt us. In this case, it hurts us. But all that brings up the subject of love. So that's why the first thing we'll talk about is love one another. They had all the gifts. They had everything, but they had it without love. And that's all I got to say about that. You got your homework assignment on the back side of that outline. I hope you'll be here next Wednesday evening. I'll try to be here myself, and